So without further ado, we'll start in December and move on through the year. So in the wintertime, right now you should have on double deeps or possibly 3 mediums, maybe a little bit smaller depending on how big your colony was going into the winter. But this is just a really crude graphic of what your colony should look like right now. So you've got honey stores, what's left of them, and the bees should be clustered somewhere in the box. We'll talk more about that later. And then in the early spring, your bees will be up at the top, and you may need to reverse the boxes late in the spring. And then summer, your bees should be covering in both of the brood boxes, and then you'll start adding honey supers based on need. And then as fall rolls back in, you'll reduce back to either the 2 deeps or the 3 mediums. And I can't see the chat, so if you guys write stuff in questions in the chat, feel free to do that as we go. We might answer your questions, and then hopefully somebody can monitor that. And if there's some burning questions, we can answer those right away, or I can stay as long as necessary and answer questions at the end. So no matter what time of year it is, you really do need to be thinking about controlling enemy number 1, and that's varroa mites. They're the #1 cause of colonies collapsing in the winter and dying early in the fall. So some things that we do in order to control those darn things is drone comb removal. Using screen bottom boards is iffy on whether that works or not, but lots of people around here use them. Most people in Puget Sound are conscious of which kind of miticides they use, because the synthetic miticides at least will accumulate in the wax, so you want to avoid that. And so by using rotating different types of natural therapies like oxalic acid, Apogard in the fall, Mitaway quick strips, powdered sugar you've probably heard about. I have that on here because people always ask about it. Can I use powdered sugar to knock the mites off? And the answer is, sure, you can use powdered sugar all day long, dust them every week, and the bees love to eat it. However, clinical, actually research studies have shown that powdered sugar is not an effective therapy for reducing mite counts, so don't bother. All right, it's winter time. What do? We're in the depths of winter right now, tending towards spring. But so for your bees, winter is all about survival, right? And so around here, that's when the average daily temps are below 50 degrees. So let that be your guide as opposed to the calendar. So what do you do in the winter? You should have capped frames of honey. It's the best nutritional source, and so hopefully you left plenty of honey in your colony. Don't feed your bees, if you don't already know this, don't feed your bees honey from the store or from any unknown sources, as it may cause foul brood. It's fine for people to eat it, it won't make us sick, but it can definitely ruin your colony and then ruin your equipment too. Dry sugar is the way to go right now. Cane or beet, doesn't matter. Dry sucrose is sucrose, and you can either feed that dry on top of newspaper or mix it with a little bit of water. You actually don't have to do that though. The easiest thing to do is to just put a newspaper down on top of the frames, dump sugar on top, and have a shim around it. And the moisture in the water will make that hard anyway. And then winter patties are what you should be using right now if you're not using sugar and your bees are clustered at the top. Those comprise of 95% sucrose or sugar, 5% pollen, and those are commercially available. Note if your bees are clustered at the top of your box and you don't feed them now, they will starve before there's enough food available for them in a couple of months. So you might think that these are my colonies on Saturday, right? Well, this is from a couple of years ago, but that's exactly what they looked like on Saturday as well. What's really cool is I took a thermal image a couple of years ago, and this is really a tale of 4 cities. You've got 4 colonies sitting right next to each other. The 2 colonies on the left, where are the bees? They're all the way at the top. In February, those bees are going to starve. So I knew that I had to feed them. The colony in the middle is still really big, And it's in the upper and the lower box, as you can see from the red heat signature. What's interesting on those colonies on the left-hand side, you see the white, that's the hottest part, and I've got round upper entrances. So that's the air venting out through those upper entrance holes, which, as you might imagine, upper entrance holes are really important in the wintertime, especially if it snows, because the bees still need to go potty. And so they'll come out and they were actually flying in the afternoons when it was snowy, even during Snowmageddon. And they would go out, take a brief romp to use the facilities, and then jet back in that upper entrance. And when it snows, as you can see, my lower entrances were covered up with snow and they wouldn't have been able to make it out. And then that colony on the far right-hand side, when I opened that up, I actually thought it was dead because there was nothing going on in the top. And then I got that thermal camera and I looked and I'm like, wow, those bees are still all clustered down in the bottom, and they did really well. All right, and believe it or not, we are moving into spring as we speak. So if you have bees right now, your main goal is to build them up to the largest colony size that they can be when those blackberries look like that. When the buds are starting out, you want your colony to be at its maximum strength. So believe it or not, the middle part of February, AKA now, is the time to consider using summer patties. And studies have shown in colonies that the ones that were fed pollen patties starting now, those colonies were actually twice as big as the colonies that were not fed pollen patties starting in mid-February. So usually what I do is I look to see when's it going to snow in February, because it always does, right? And so as soon as the snow's gone, that's when I put the pollen patties on. So probably mine are going on, the summer patties are going on next weekend. And so what to do and when to feed those bees. And by the way, as soon as you start adding pollen patties, their nutrition needs go up, and because they start raising brood, they've got to keep it warmer in there, and there's more bees. So it can be really easy for them to starve out if you don't stay on top of it. And so in fact, last year I had a nucleus colony actually starve in just 2 weeks because I put a big pollen patty on there. They ate through it and then they starved the third week. So if you use the pollen patties, the summer patties are 75% sugar and then 30% protein or so. And those two, unless you have a lot of colonies, it's easier and just as inexpensive to buy those patties pre-made in the store. If you want to make your own patties, there are recipes available. It's messy, it's sticky, and it's kind of a pain. So like I said, unless you have a lot of colonies, it's probably best to just buy those. And then when it gets when average daily temps get above 55 degrees, that's when you can start adding 1-to-1 sugar. And that's when they'll really start building wax too. So if you need wax, 1-to-1 sugar syrup is the way to go, even into the summer and the honey flow. If you have a new colony, the best thing to do is to go ahead and keep on feeding them 1-to-1 syrup until they either stop taking it or until you've got all your wax drawn out. That's the biggest mistake I see of new beekeepers in the spring when they get their new bees, is they stop feeding sugar syrup, and the bees aren't populous enough to build their own wax, so they don't build the wax, and then they say, I didn't get any honey, and that's the main reason. So these slides are courtesy of Randy Oliver. I asked permission to have these in my slide deck, and this is from one of his presentations. It's First Year Beekeeper on his website, scientificbeekeeping.com. If you have not been to his site yet, I highly recommend it. It's just full of great information about beekeeping. His site and Rusty's site, the Honeybee Suite like a hotel suite, SUITE, is also a very reputable website. So Randy has this great section about reading the combs. And so you need to learn how to read when your bees are hungry. And if you notice that on the top left-hand corner, there's honey in the top, there's a nice band of pollen, and then the brood. So they, like us, like to have our refrigerator close to the TV set. And so they like to have lots of food. And in this one on the right-hand side, this interface, there is no pollen in it. So the bees are hungry and they're bringing in pollen not as fast as they are using it to raise all this really nice brood. And so they'll either cannibalize some of this brood to feed the other, or the queen will stop laying. So it's really important to stay on top of that interface. Not only do they have enough honey, but do they have enough pollen as well? So what do early spring inspections look like? People say to me right now, oh, and I read this on the forums, whatever you do, don't open your colony up right now, it's too cold. Well, that's some terrible advice. So you really have to be careful about the advice that you listen to in those forums and on the internet. And so if you notice, this colony is clustered all at the top. And so their honey and their food stores are gone. And there's not enough yet for them to go out and feed themselves. So if I want them to live, I've got to feed them. So you notice that there are some pollen patties in here. These are winter patties. See how light colored they are? They're almost all sugar and just a little bit of pollen substitute. So when I opened this colony up, I pushed the pollen patties closer to where the cluster is. So you can see the one on the right-hand side I'd already pushed up next to the cluster, and the other one, I just needed to push that forward. And so this is the configuration that I have going right now. I have 2 deeps. I have that feeding shim down below, and then I have a moisture quilt on the top that has rabbit shavings in the top that collects the moisture so that it doesn't rain back down on the bees. And literally your inspections right now should be every 2 or 3 weeks, just to make sure as they're building up for spring that they still have sugar up there in that shim. And so there's just literally a quick peek underneath. You flip that up, just tilt it up a little bit, see if they have food. If they need it, you put some in. If they don't, you close it back up. And that's it for the inspection right now. Once the temperature gets up around 55 degrees, then you can plan on moving frames around and moving honey frames in closer. And if you need to do a quick box reversal, that's fine too. When it is around 55 degrees, I do recommend that you be quick about it and make sure that you have a plan before you get in the box, because each time you take those frames out, they've got to warm that brood area back up to 93, 95 degrees, and it takes them a little while to do that. And it disrupts their ability to keep the brood nice and warm. And you might get a little bit of chalk brood when you do that. So you do want to limit the access until it warms up a little bit more. All right, and then late spring, when it's consistently above 55 degrees, this is where I talked about, have a plan, work quickly, and avoid opening it up on rainy or windy days. You can do it, but the bees don't like it very much and they get kind of snarky. So you really want to make sure that you have your smoker going and your bee suit on. And then the spring is also a good time to think about replacing an old queen. So if you have a queen that's older than last fall or midsummer, it's probably a really good idea to think about replacing her. If you want to have a local queen, then you would need to wait till June to replace her. If you want to get a queen earlier than that, you need to get on a list pretty quickly, because all the commercial guys have their bees down in California right now, and their next move is to take them to the orange groves and to make splits. And the splits take up tons of queens, right? So all the queen breeders in Hawaii and California and across the South are building up right now to create queens for all those splits that people have bought that are either going to go in nukes or in splits. Let's see. Enough on that. Let's talk about splits themselves. So this is the most important slide for those of you that are thinking about doing splits this spring. I have seen so many people make the mistake of trying to split too early. And then they call me up and they say, I don't get it. My queen is only laying drones I split the same time that I always have. And this happened last spring to several of my friends who are really experienced beekeepers who, by gosh, come March 1st, come hell or high water, they split their colonies because they got away with it the year before because it was warm. And well, guess what? Spring came late last year and they made some serious mistakes and had some colonies collapse because of it. So here's my humble advice. For those of you that are planning on making splits this spring, make sure that you first have drones hatching. Call your neighbors, call the bee buddy down the road from you. I live in Renton. One of my good friends lives in West Seattle. And I kid you not, we're 10 miles away, barely. And they have drones about a week and a half or two every year before we do in Renton. I don't know why, but we've got a ton of different microclimates. So don't go by what your friends are doing, go by what your bees are doing. And once you have drones, then you can think about making splits. But the other piece of the puzzle that's really important is to, before you make splits, look to see what the long range forecast is, because the other piece of that is that your drones have to be 2 weeks old before they'll fly and go for mating. So if you've got hatching drones and you make a split and let's say a walkaway split, and you're going to let the bees make their own queen, well, she'll hatch in 16 days, but then she'll need 2 or 3 more days for her exoskeleton to harden so she can go fly. But guess what? If there's not 70-degree days, 65 to 70-degree days in the forecast, and it's too cold, she won't fly. Or if it's going to be raining and cold, she won't fly. And she'll only have a couple of weeks before she'll end up being a drone laying queen. And that's exactly what happened to my friends last year. They all ended up with drone laying queens because they started 2 weeks early. All right, so you still want to split and you want to do it earlier? No problem, just make sure you buy a queen, right? So you don't have to do a walkaway split or any other type of split where you leave the bees queenless. You can always go ahead and split, just make sure you've got a queen in hand before you do that. That way you've got the old queen and the new queen. I do recommend that you at least put the old queen in the new box. That will help reduce the swarming urge. All right, and then the summer is all about filling the pantry for the bees, and it's all about them making honey for us, right? And so that's really the blackberry bloom through the knotweed or the fireweed bloom here. And last year was another weird year. The blackberries and the knotweed bloomed early. So the blackberries and the knotweed overlapped at my house. It was the weirdest thing. So avoiding swarms, last year I saw most people, well, first the swarm urge was super high last summer. So I don't know how it was up north, but in King County, the South King County, there were swarms everywhere. In fact, I'm on the Puget Sound swarm list and I was pretty much over it by the middle of the season. And a bunch of my friends just didn't have any more equipment. There were so many bees. So you do it. On the forums last year, it said that, hey, when your bees are thinking about swarming, you need to split. Well, you can do that, but you won't end up with any honey for yourself. So a couple of years ago, you see these boxes in my backyard, those same ones that had snow on them. And you can see how huge the colonies on the left got and how small the colonies on the right got. And the one colony on the far right swarmed. Yes, that even happens to master beekeepers. So my daughter at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, even those bees left early, she's like, hey, Mom, why is there a bunch of bees outside my window? And I looked at her window, I'm like, oh no. And I chased them down the street. So it can happen to all of us. So actually we do a talk in June about May or June at Puget Sound Beekeepers every year about how to manage space to prevent swarms, because obviously the bigger your colony is, the more honey they produce. So you want to ride that fine line between managing your space and not losing your bees. So managing your space is two-pronged. It's managing the honey storage area. So remember that when they bring the nectar in, it's really wet, so it takes more space than that dehydrated honey. So you've got to have extra space for them to put all that wet nectar in, and then the bees move it around and they dehydrate it at the same time. So you want to stay ahead of honey storage needs, and then you also need to stay ahead of brood space needs, and never let the queen run out of space to lay eggs, whether that's needing to add another box or to take a frame of capped brood and the nurse bees that are adhering to it and putting it in a smaller colony to bolster theirs. You need to make sure that those fast and furious laying queens don't run out of space, otherwise they will swarm. All right, and this is where the mites come back to haunt us again. In the summer, especially after the summer solstice, believe it or not, the bee population is starting to go down, but the mite population is climbing. So there's a couple of things that I highly recommend, either a sugar shake method to count the mites, or my favorite is the alcohol wash. You do sacrifice 300 bees, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few in this case. And there's a couple of websites that you can go to learn how to do a sugar shake or an alcohol wash. And I can send you these guys, a PDF of this so that you can post the presentation too. So the picture on the far upper left, this is drone trapping. And I have what's called Varroa hygienic queens. And you notice that there's a lot of drones missing in this. What's cool about these bees is they smell the mites in the cappings, and they pull the infested larva out with the mites, and it interrupts the mite reproduction cycle. And what you'll notice if you have Varroa hygienic queens is that you can freeze these, and then you can uncap all of them, and you might find one or two mites in those drone larvae that were left over that the bees didn't smell and take out. It's really cool. If you have bees that are not Varroa hygienic at all, this will be a more solid pattern. You freeze it, you take the wax cappings off, and practically every cell will have mites in it in a colony that's pretty infested. Note down here that right here, this little bee, poor thing, has deformed wing virus. And the bee right next to it has a mite right on it. The one with deformed wing virus has mites. A few years ago, my partner and I managed a couple colonies for a new beekeeper who wanted us to teach her beekeeping and also wanted to practice treatment-free beekeeping. And we tried to convince her that treatment-free beekeeping was a bad idea, but boy, she wanted to do it. So she bought 10 colonies. And towards the fall, we actually took bets with each other on the side on how long those poor little bees were going to live. And it wasn't 2 weeks after they looked like this that they were all dead. They just crashed. And so, believe me, if you're thinking about practicing treatment-free beekeeping, please think twice and do something. All right, and then this late summer, July, is about protection from enemy number 2, yellow jackets and wasps. Don't like them, can you tell? If you're buying your equipment right now, do yourself a favor and invest in a really nice and really inexpensive way to keep the yellow jackets out of your colony, and those are called robbing screens. And notice this picture. What's wrong with this picture? These are all wasps. These are all wasps. And I made a mistake. This is in an out yard. And in this, when the wasps start hovering around your colony, you should close this front entrance. There's another entrance up here on the top that the bees can go in, that the yellow jackets don't figure out how to get in. But it was in my out yard and I made a mistake and I didn't close this front box and they wiped them out. The ones that they didn't kill actually ended up over in the next door box because that colony was about twice as big as it was the 2 weeks before I had seen it last. So a lot of those bees absconded and said, please let us in. and these little buggers took over. So you really do need to have the robbing screens early. If supply is anything like it was last year, don't count on ordering it when you need it, because stuff took sometimes a month to 6 weeks to get where it needed. These are easy to make too if you're at all handy, with 1/8 inch hardware cloth, 1x2s, a little bit of scrap plywood, and any sort of metallic object that you can cut to shape. And then I use stainless steel screws so that they don't rust either. So highly recommended on that. All right, and then raising winter bees starts actually in August. Believe it or not, essential winter colony survival means that you need to have healthy winter bees. So you've got to have the mites under control in August when they start making these bees. And winter bees are actually physiologically different than summer bees. This is a really interesting article about something called vitellogenin. And this is basically fat bodies. And fat bodies are what the mites eat too, by the way. But this is a nice fat winter bee on the right-hand side, and a not so fat summer bee. And they are, like I said, physiologically different, and they start raising them in August. That's why it's so important to make sure that your bees are healthy early on in August. And it also in August, this is when it dries up and gets hot around here. And people say, hey, my bees stopped laying eggs, my queen died. Well, no, the queens don't usually die in August. Sometimes they do. But in August, when it gets so hot around here, the pollen sources also dry up. So the queens will take a brood break right when you want them laying lots of eggs for the winter bees. So I have started winter bees. So I've actually started using pollen patties in August when this interface disappears, so that they'll start laying again. And then as soon as the rains hit, the pollen sources come back. So just watch this interface and help give them a boost if they need it. And then finally, when can I replace my honey supers, or when do I take them off? Most people take them off only once a year. I have knotweed right behind my house, and I like to sell knotweed honey. And so I do take my honey supers off, but I also have my own extractor. So it's easy for me to extract the blackberry honey right after the blackberries are done blooming, and then put my supers right back on, so that they'll sometimes collect a wildflower honey in July timeframe, and then usually the knotweed doesn't start blooming till the end of August around here. So, but like I said, that didn't happen last year. I got blackberry honey and knotweed because the knotweed started blooming in July. But you definitely want to remove the supers in time that they have enough honey stores. So 70 pounds-ish is the general amount that most people say they need for being able to have that. And then rounding it up with fall, this is one of my bees a couple of years ago on knotweed blooms. So fall here is after the knotweed stops blooming, or after the fireweed, and before average daily temperatures fall below 50 degrees. So if your bees don't have enough honey stored, that's 70 pounds plus, then fall is when you want to start adding 2-to-1 syrup, and you want to add it when it's still warm enough that they'll take it. So again, they won't take honey, or they won't take syrup after the daytime temps get around, the mid to low 50s, and it'll just go to waste. So figure feeding them 2-to-1, that's 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. And you do actually need to heat that in order for it to dissolve. So what I do is I heat the water first and add the sugar. You have to be careful with sugar on the stove, because you don't want to scorch it. Scorched sugar is actually poisonous to bees. So usually I heat the water first and add the sugar. And then if you do have any extra syrup, you can just put that in the freezer and save it for the spring, and then just dilute it. Same goes, by the way, with the dry sugar that you put on your colonies in the wintertime. I've got a couple of colonies that died, and I just dumped the dry sugar into a bucket, and I'll just add water and make that into 1-to-1 syrup for the bees in the spring. so nothing goes to waste. All right, and then let's see. Fall inspections, whoops. So fall inspections, this is where if you have a failing queen, you definitely want to not go into the winter with a failing queen. And so this is a nice frame to show that this is a failing queen. Note right here and right here, you have 2 queen cells that they're starting. These are supersedure cells saying, this queen sucks, we need to get rid of her before the winter comes. And you notice that they also still have drones. And so the fall is when people say this is when beekeepers take their losses. So this is when you replace those queens, or if you have small colonies, consider combining them, because especially if you're an inexperienced beekeeper, you're much more likely to get a full-size colony through the winter than 2 small ones. You can always split in the spring, but the trick is getting small colonies through the winter does take an experienced beekeeper or a little bit of luck or both. And I like to make sure and hedge my bets and try to get large colonies through the winter as opposed to tiny ones. And this is when you reduce back to the minimum number of boxes that you need. So those giant colonies that from those pictures before all got reduced down to 2 deeps, or my friends have mediums. And so 2 deeps or 3 mediums are an equivalent size. You want to reduce down to that and unite those small colonies. And then winterizing your boxes, we've come full circle. Obviously, you want to have your lids tied down or weighted down in some fashion. I am a scuba diver, and I have found untold numbers of lead weights underneath the water and have repurposed them, and they work pretty good to hold the lids down on my colonies. I also have a 1-inch rigid insulation inside my telescoping lids. Those really help cut down on the heat loss in the winter. And then, like I mentioned earlier, these upper entrances come in really handy, both for ventilation and to help the bees have a way to get in and out during the winter time. Oh, and the entrance reducer. So the entrance reducer in this picture is in the wrong position, but the entrance reducers in the winter, you want them on the smallest entrance, you want it facing up. And the reason why you want it facing up is then the dead bees that naturally die in the winter will form a carpet of dead bees in the bottom. And so if it's facing down, those dead bees might cover the entrance. So if it's facing up, they'll have a way to get out if they want to use the lower entrance. And then in the spring, you just flip that over and around to the largest opening. And so, in summary, I just want to come full circle and say, ditch the calendar. You'll be a lot better off following your instincts and following the bees on how to manage their needs and anticipate the seasonal resources and changes that your colony needs ahead of them in order to make sure that they're as happy as they can be. And you can really make a difference by following the weather as opposed to following the calendar. And that's it.